Hello, my name is Zahar Karetsky, and this is the Transitions Visions podcast, a podcast series about and for the sustainability transitions community. Today we will talk with Lukas Fuchs about the role of state in transitions. Lukas has won a Best Paper Award of 2023 by the Next Society Institute for his manuscript on the topic of the steering function of the state in techno-economic transformations for sustainability. So naturally, I wanted to talk to him about it. In recent years, the topic of the state taking a more active role in governance of transitions has been gaining traction, most prominently with the idea of missions. Famously, these ideas are embedded in the Horizon Europe 7-year research funding program. Lukas is a postdoctoral fellow in the Philosophy and Ethics group in Eindhoven University of Technology, and we talked about social systems theory and philosophy behind calls for and against a more active state. So enjoy this episode and stay tuned for more transitions visions in the future. So we're here with Lukas Fuchs, postdoc researcher in philosophy and ethics at Eindhoven University of Technology. Hi, Lukas.
Hi, nice to see you. Thanks for having me, Zaha.
I was intrigued by your paper that you are working on currently, and you shared a little bit about it. So the topic is steering and state and missions. One of the first things I want to kind of ask is, how did you get interested in this particular topic on steering and state?
So my research comes from engaging with this new thinking about the role of the state in the economy and economic change with a view to grand societal challenges. So when I started my PhD, I got the homework to look what philosophers can say about these new ideas about the entrepreneurial state, or the mission-oriented innovation. And so I ended up writing a PhD with Mariana Mazzucato, who has done more than anyone else to popularize and to make academics and policymakers aware of these ideas about the role of the state. And I ended up writing a PhD about the questions that arise from political philosophy, theories about political legitimacy, when it comes to these new ideas about the role of the state. And often these, political philosophy, liberalism is informed by a certain kind of individualism. So the idea is you have society and the individual. You have the state and the individual. And if you propose that the state should do something more ambitious than it has been doing, then you say, well, but this limits individual freedom, or it limits the spontaneity of individual citizens, or it limits the extent to which individuals can use their knowledge. And so my PhD dealt with that, but I was somehow dissatisfied with that kind of framing, because I thought this doesn't really make sense of the real issues that policymakers face, or transition scholars, people thinking about innovation. And here I discovered I discovered systems theory, and I discovered the work of Niklas Luhmann, who was a very weird German sociologist you've probably never heard of before. And he proposes to study social life and society, not in terms of individuals coming together and then meeting in the market or forming a social contract in politics, but to start with systems, to start with social systems from the start. And so you have the political system, you have the economic system, you have research, and we should understand these systems as forms of communication in society that somehow reproduce and exist. And we shouldn't think primarily of individuals doing that. Of course, ultimately it's people who do research and communicate in the research system, but we should start thinking with systems. And in this paper that you took a look at, I think about these new ideas about the role of the state in the economy, to transform the economy, to shape markets, to formulate missions, to restructure our economy towards a more sustainable world. And I analyzed that from the perspective of systems theory by Niklas Luhmann.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I knew about Luhmann only because of his system of actually note-taking, right? He's famous for that, because he was quite prolific, and that was actually because he had a huge, a very organized system of note-taking. And now everybody.
The Zettelkasten.
That's the one.
Big box of little drawers with lots of notes in it.
He had quite an original ontology, right? Social ontology. So what does he say about steering? Is he proposing that policymakers are in this cockpit situation that they can control easily?
Luhmann is skeptical of steering. He thinks that's not going to work out. So if you're some kind of left-winger who thinks the state should jump in and steer the economy or replace the economy or do this or do that, Luhmann thinks you're set up for failure. Mm-hmm. Because Luhmann thinks that these different subsystems in society, these social systems, they exist for a very good reason. We have the political system for a good reason. It's there to institute collectively binding decisions. But we also have the economic system for a very good reason, to economize scarce resources. And he has similar answers for other systems. And if one system tries to replace or to steer the other system, he thinks that it's likely to end up in failure, because one system will impose its own form of communication on the other system, and in this way, replace it or make it defunct, and that's not good, because these social subsystems exist for a good reason. And that's the challenge. If you're like me and you like Luhmann, you think that he has given us a very good way of thinking about social life, a good social ontology, then we're faced with this problem that the same guy who has this very, very good way of thinking social life is deeply skeptical of such a steering function. And by the way, it's not just the political system that he's skeptical of to take such a function, but also other systems, such as morality or others. So he would say that it's the self-regulation of systems that we should first look at before we think about one system steering another system.
Self-regulation within systems.
Exactly. So one system regulating itself, so like the economic system trying to regulate itself, even though Luhmann is a social ontologist, and he's very convincing there. But he's also a sociologist. He makes claims about society and certain problems there. And his theory there is functional differentiation. Functional differentiation means that these subsystems of society, they differentiate themselves more and more. They become the economic system is all about money or not money, payment or not payment. And these forms of communication, these instances of economic life, they become more, we would say specialized. They become more detached from other areas of social life, like the political system or the research system. And that was a big achievement, you might think. That was a big achievement in the last centuries of liberalization, where we've given space to the research community, we've given space to the economy. But now we're faced with the challenge that we have a lack of coordination between these systems. So Luhmann gives us a very good way of thinking about the need for such coordination. He tells us why it would be needed to steer systems, but he's also skeptical that such steering is possible at all. So it's a bit frustrating to work with Luhmann.
Hmm. And so he doesn't really say how one should influence, how one is supposed to influence a system.
Luhmann has a couple of ideas how one system can influence each other. One example that he uses is that of a structural coupling.
Okay.
So he thinks there are some things in society that are at the intersection between different social systems. So the contract is one example. The contract is part of the legal system. So if you want to set up a contract, you usually go to a lawyer, you go to the courts to dispute a contract. But a contract is also an integral part of the economic system. When you sell your house, you set up a contract. And so the idea is with these structural couplings, such as a contract, you find ways how one system can influence and irritate the other system. But he thinks that's of limited use if you want to get another system to do one thing or another, if you want to develop it in a certain direction or not. So there are some ideas, but there are limits to it. At least Luhmann thinks there are great limits to that.
Yeah.
I think there is a big intellectual project here, and this is a project both in the policy arena to think about how we can change change the way we think about policy and think about the role of the state in the economy. We come out of a time where we had very negative connotations with the state, with bureaucracy. The economy was the driving force, was creative, was constructive, and everything that's good comes out of the economy, and the state is this boring organization that just limits and regulates, and all the boring things happens there. And we should limit the state as much as possible in our society. And I think it was the achievement of Mariana Mazzucato and others to change that narrative in the last decade or so, and to see the state as part of the solution and not just part of the problem, and to start coming up with something like a more general theory of the value that is produced in the public sector, the role of the state vis-a-vis the economy and other areas of social life, and know-how, how we can do this, how this is to be done. And I think we can now see this being tried out and implemented in various stages. Of course, it's a question to which extent the practice reflects or manifests the theory here. But this is a real policy development here. And I think we also need to have an intellectual project that accompanies that, where we need to go and think about deeper notions that we inherited in the history about the role of politics, about the role of the state in the economy, and how different areas of social life, politics, economy, and so on, work together in bringing about a new future, ultimately.
I guess it makes sense from a rigor perspective to look at a very critical scholar like Luhmann, who is touching on the same topics, but is very critical of them. So how did you engage with him? How does his theory help?
So I think we can learn most when we engage with critics, or at least that's something that when you study philosophy, then you're taught to love your critics and your opponents more than your friends.
Nice.
So I think there is a danger that we, friends of a neo-statist account of how a sustainability transition should be carried out often just look at the positive examples and the arguments and dismiss, all these neoliberal market fundamentalists who obviously got everything wrong. Because very often there are respectable intellectual traditions behind these, and we can learn a lot about our proposals and also how to move forward in the debates. So in the past, I worked on Hayek, Friedrich August Hayek, the Austrian economist who is most closely associated with market fundamentalism and I think with Luhmann there's something similar going on. Luhmann has a very sophisticated and convincing account of social life, of social ontology. He gives us a very good idea and critique and a good understanding why we need coordination, why we need to tackle sustainability issues in the first place, I think. And so I think it's a worthwhile intellectual project to try to use the conceptual resources from a thinker like Luhmann in order to reconceptualize one's own position, reconceptualize what it means for the state to have a steering function in society.
Well, Luhmann has been writing in the 80s, right? Or in the 70s, 80s. What do you think that obviously there's a lot of change has happened since then. What kind of difference between the debates during his life and current ones do you think are most influential for the things that you are researching in state and its steering function?
So you're completely right to point out that Luhmann is by now a historical figure. He lived in the 20th century. He died in 1998. And so you might think that it's always good to look at great authors from the past, but what can he contribute to contemporary policy debates? I think there are a couple of changes that have taken place in how people think about political economy. And these changes are also elements to how I propose we reinterpret Luhmann, or how we should, how Luhmann would think differently about these things, or should think differently about these things today. And the first is that when Luhmann was writing in the 80s, political economy was poor in the sense that it was very welfarist, it was very welfare-based. So the idea was we have to produce goods, we have to get these goods to people and to make these people happy. This is very traditional neoclassical welfare economics. You have one goal, maximize the welfare of humans. The economy can be assumed to be very efficient at doing so, except when there are market failures, and then the state comes in and fixes these things. And so now you might ask, well, how good is the state at fixing these things or contributing to certain public goods? Luhmann was mostly a child of his time, of these debates. He couldn't really foresee the developments that we've witnessed in the last decades, where first of all, we don't expect the state just to address human welfare, narrowly construed, but we have this whole list of societal challenges. Animals, other living beings on the planet, the climate crisis, equality, inclusiveness. All of these things have a much greater importance in what are the rationales for economic policy making. And the other thing that Luhmann didn't really foresee was that we understand that the state or the political system has many more mechanisms at its disposal when it comes to influencing or steering the economy. So I think this traditional way of looking at it was that the state can do two things. It can come up with laws and regulations and limit what individual actors or what businesses do, and it can tax and redistribute. And that's a very poor understanding, I think. And now when we think about, these more ambitious visions of mission-oriented policy, we realize that the research that is carried out at universities, that comes from the state ultimately. There used to be things like state investment banks. They are now being set up again. Infrastructure projects, public procurement. There is state-owned enterprises. There are many more linkages or connections between the state and the economy, and how these parts of the state, how these decisions are made, has a great influence on the direction of economic change that is taking place. And Luhmann didn't really see or discuss any of that. So for him, the relationship between the political and the economic system was mostly conflictual. So if you have more political interest, then the economic, or more political the dominance of the political system, then there's less money or there's less space for the economic system. And I think that is flawed. I think we now have a very different way of understanding this co-creative or synergistic relationship between politics and economy.
Have you looked at beyond Luhmann when you started maybe this paper? Have you looked at other people in the field, in systems, in the field of system dynamics, or just system thinking?
The short answer is no,
Yeah.
because it takes quite some time.
Yeah.
Looking at systems theories, there is the teacher of Luhmann was Talcott Parsons, and he drew a lot from that. And maybe a different branch of this development is Hayek again. So Hayek, in his later work, Law, Legislation and Liberty, he was influenced a lot by cybernetics, systems thinking.
Okay.
And I think what Luhmann says about spontaneous order should also be understood in light of systems theory. The market or the economy as an order that is somehow detached, or that plays a very distinct role in society. So in this sense, yeah, but I'm aware that there are more people in this camp of systems thinkers, and yeah.
So you just said that Luhmann talked a lot about systems and subsystems, and he has a whole ontology of systems. So talking about sustainability, which is a topic you engage with in your manuscript, so which systems or subsystems are more suited to actually tackle climate crisis?
That's a very complex question.
Okay.
That's a very good question, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this. But I think one key realization in the last year. So I said there was this revival of appreciation for the role of the state in the economy, and I think one part of this appreciation was not just that there are some positive instances of innovation in the past where the state had a direct influence, parts of the state, but also this realization that so much that is being done is directly or indirectly steered or molded or shaped by policy and state actors. So the idea to give the state a prominent role is not necessarily the idea that let's size up the state, let's make a bigger or more powerful state. The state is already big and powerful, but the idea is to let this be guided by the proper goals and ideas about how to do this. So I think this realization that the state, that this is how our society is already set up. Many people now realize this as part of the COVID pandemic, where many businesses continue to survive because of state subsidies, but I think it goes deeper. This is one part. But you might think there are other subsystems that we should look at. For example, morality. If you think that morality is a subsystem of society, the good and the bad. Maybe this is the key leverage point, and only by changing how we think and talk about the good and the bad are we able to shape the political discourse and later other discourses. And then you might think, well, it's actually all about research, and we as researchers have the key here. So I think there are some good reasons why the political system has come into focus in recently, but I think this is a very complex and open question. What do you think?
Well, yeah, it should be somehow a mix or overlap of different ones, but I don't know enough about Luhmann's ideas, which actually was quite interesting because his idea of a system is a different one than, for example, in transition studies. Could you briefly describe or talk about what the system is for in Luhmann's sort of work?
So you're right to point out that Luhmann has a very theoretical notion of a system. So, for example, in transition studies, you have things like the socio-technical regime, which gives you a handle of a constellation of things like the policy and the consumer preferences and the artifacts that are there and that continue to evolve somehow. Luhmann's account of a system is somewhat different to that. So for Luhmann, a system consists of communications, instances of communication, but communication is not necessarily people talking to each other. So when, for example, when we exchange things in the market, I sell you my phone, that is a communication for him, even if we don't talk. So these individual transactions, these individual things are all part of such a system. So a system is an area of social life that functions according to a certain logic or to a certain binary code.
Yeah, right. So very kind of something very much like a computer system or a cybernetic system, and it's very apparent heritage, I guess.
So that makes it a very fascinating social ontology, but the links to, so if you're a transition scholar and you think, oh, I'm now using Luhmann's systems account in order to criticize the energy system or the mobility system, you're on the wrong track, or more work has to be done here. So yeah, these are two different ways of thinking about going beyond individuals in thinking about social life.
So given that you are critical about his skepticism, or do I understand it correctly, that you are critical about his skepticism about the possibility of steering?
Exactly.
Right. So do you propose to, how do you propose to use his ideas? Or is it just only for an inspirational kind of drive that he's provided?
Exactly. So Luhmann thinks his talk of social systems shows we should be skeptical of the steering function of one system over another. And I think Luhmann is wrong in this. I think if we use his thinking of social systems, we can arrive at different conclusions, or what the policy implications that he draws from his theory are not necessitated. We can arrive at other policy ideas. At least that's my ambition.
And you can read that in your paper when it's published.
You can read that in my paper when it's published. Maybe the idea is that systems don't just have a binary code on which they operate. So the political system operates on power versus non-power, or economy on payment versus non-payment. But there is a different quality to another quality to systems, which is the program, which is the sum of knowledge and factors that is required to apply this code. So in order to apply the code of money or not, payment or not, we need to have a program of prices, for example, or program of regulations that something can be exchanged or not in the economy. And Luhmann recognizes that there is this factor, there is this big gray space of what makes a system operate, but he doesn't really elaborate what that is and how that changes whether one system is able to influence or even steer another system. But I think that's where the answer lies in, because when we think about techno-economic transformations for sustainability, what we want to change is not abolishing market, or what many talk about is not abolishing markets or abolishing exchange through payment, but changing, socio-technical systems, transitioning them, coming up with different products or different consumer environments that make us consume and produce differently. So I think that's where the answer lies within Luhmann in order to counter his own skepticism on the steering role.
I wonder about the state. Is state a system in this sense?
You're right, the state is not a system.
Okay.
The politics is a system, because politics is a form of communication. If you go into the parliament and you hear parliamentarians give speeches, these are most clearly forms of communication of the political system. But the state is an organization in which various systems operate. So the state, for example, also consists of state-owned enterprises. And there it's more clear that the economic system is dominant, you might think. Similarly, we are here at the university, and the research system is perhaps the most prevalent one. But if I want to buy your iPhone here, then it's still about the money here. Or we both can sit here because we're paid by the university. We receive a salary. So there is still the economic system here as well. So the different organizations and different individuals are interpenetrated, funny word, interpenetrated by different systems. I think the answer to clarify the relationship between the state and the political is to say that the state is, or perhaps should, be mainly oriented towards the political. That's what the state is there for. But of course, there are many other. You have economists working for the state. In an important sense, we too are part of the state. We receive our salary from some research funding, and so the research system is, or the university system is some extension of the state. So the organizations and systems have a weird relationship in this way of thinking.
Are there any other organizations that are acting like this kind of hub for different systems?
Of course, yeah. So I think we would like to think, for example, that companies companies are perhaps the clearest expression of the economic system. You have people who come up with a product or whatever, and they want to sell it on the market, and so earn money and economize on a scarce resource and participate in this exchange. But if we think that companies also have some responsibility in how they invest and how they produce and what they sell, then we would like to think that the political system or the moral system also plays a role within these organizations, whether or not they actually play a role there.
Because I was, as you were talking, I was reflecting whether why the state seems so important, maybe because it is a hub for so many of these different systems, or not.
Exactly. Yeah. So one way to understand the state today is to go back at this notion of Luhmann, structural coupling. So structural coupling is something that is at the intersection between different subsystems. And earlier I said that the contract is at the intersection between the legal and the economic system. And it looks like the state is a big knot of such structural couplings. Because you have, a big nod to the economy. You have economists in the state who think about what's good for the economy. You have investment bankers. You have people who try to regulate and collaborate with certain industries. And the same is true for the research system. You have research. You have civil servants who think about how to organize big research funding schemes, how to organize and reform universities, how to collaborate with universities. And the same is true for the legal system. So it looks like the state is like a big knot of such structural couplings that has the leverage and the capacity to bring about that kind of coordination of different systems in society for something like a sustainability transitions.
Okay, so immediately thoughts also come to mind about the threat of bureaucracy and authoritarian overreach and so on. How do you deal with that, with or without help of Luhmann, Luhmann's thinking?
So that's a very important, that's a key question.
Yeah, well.
So I think there are two. First, I think, as I said, we come out of a period where the economy has had or the logic of the economy has had a very dominating influence over society. And a philosopher called Elizabeth Anderson has written a book, Private Government, on how businesses actually exercise a lot of domination in society. And so you might think, well, we've managed to restrict the bureaucracy of the state, but what did we get in exchange for that? The flip side is to say, well, state bureaucracy isn't always bad, or we have to rethink how we talk about this. So, bureaucracy can also be creative. We too are part of the state bureaucracy, but we are very special kinds of bureaucrats. We're made to go into a PhD where we wander through the desert for some years in order to become creative and come up with supposedly original thoughts.
That's the best kind of bureaucracy.
It's the best kind of bureaucracy. So we have to think differently of what makes state activity means. But the key answer to this worry here is that the proposal is not to size up the state now, to have a more powerful state, to go back to say, oh, a bigger proportion of the GDP should run through the state or something like that. The idea is that we already have these immense connections between the political system, the state, and other areas of society, and the real challenge is just how we use these appropriately. But you're right that there are dangers of authoritarianism, and there are dangers of overextension of one system to the other. And I think this might be something where the warning words of Luhmann might help us, because Luhmann says, don't make one of these obsolete, or don't make one of these subsystems like the economic system defunct. So ultimately we have to stick with something that you said earlier, namely a polycentric vision of society, where we leave an important space of creativity and spontaneity to these subsystems like the economic system in our society. So
it's wise words from from Lukas. I guess something that I wanted to come back to is how sort of how is Luhmann dealing with the global north and global south? From reading your paper, I got an impression that it's quite focused on global north, or is it not so?
Yeah, so by now it should be clear that Luhmann is a very abstract thinker,
Okay.
and you wonder, okay, the political system, but where is the political system if the state is now interpenetrated? And
Right.
so he's an abstract thinker, and he gives us this way of talking about things, but in an important sense, there are many details to be filled out here. So you're right to say that Luhmann was a 20th century scholar who lived in Germany for most of his life. He studied that in the US for some time. But this is a very Western thinker who stands in a very Western tradition of thinking of society. There's this episode that I heard that Luhmann late in his life visited a few Latin American countries, and he was so shocked that things are different here.
No.
And he thought that this shows that much of his writing is not as universal as he would have liked to think. So absolutely, this is a thinker from the global north, a European thinker who was shaped by the 20th century. On the other hand, this is a very abstract thinker who I believe has interesting things to say about a whole range of things that are relevant for us today. And so one advantage of theorists or philosophers is that they can be reinterpreted in new ages and by different people in different situations. So perhaps that's one of the reasons why not just people in Europe or in North America should look at Luhmann, but also those in the global south.
Yeah, that's nice advice for PhD students who want to engage with these topics. You can reinterpret things. You can reinterpret Luhmann. Would you actually recommend to PhD students to engage with him with the topic of sustainability or whether other topic?
So I'm not someone who should give advice to anyone on choosing research.
Okay.
I think Luhmann is a very it's a very rich resource of ideas. I think that the best you can do is to read Luhmann and to understand what does Luhmann say about your topic. And interrogate Luhmann on your topic, reinterpret him, not just do scholarly, Luhmann writes this in the footnote and we have to understand this. But I think just Luhmann scholarship would that's, I'm not sure whether that's a road to academic success, or a road to contributing to big academic and societal problems.
Right. I guess that niche is covered by you already.
Well, so I wouldn't call myself a Luhmann expert. I've done what I just said. Luhmann has written way too many books to read as part of a PhD or as part of a postdoctoral fellowship. What I've done is exactly that. I've come to Luhmann with a certain question and interrogated him on what he can say about this, and then I tried to go into a conversation in writing.
Yeah, and I noticed you're quite diverse in your interests. Last couple of, I think it was in spring that you presented on exoneration and on the topic of destabilization and decline. And this is kind of adjacent to your current paper. But yeah, is it actually?
Yeah. So you're completely right that I have a problem specializing and focusing on an area. You're right about that.
I didn't say it was a problem.
I think I would characterize my overall research vision as understanding the different values of actors in techno-economic change. And the state is, as I mentioned many times today, one of the key actors in bringing about that. So when I think about different philosophers or different sociologists, as Luhmann was a sociologist, then I want to hear what can we learn about this question. And as you mentioned, I've started working on exnovation, or the termination of products or services, technologies in society, because, as you know better than many others, this is an extremely important topic when we think about how we can transition, how we can transform our mobility and energy systems. So I thought that many of the issues, the value questions that I've discovered in innovation can also, be rehashed and reinterpreted in the case of exnovation, of the termination of products. But you shouldn't interview me about the termination of technologies. That would be much more your topic.
Yeah, on episode 100, I will definitely interview myself. Maybe using ChatGPT. Can you tell us about other sort of topics that you are looking into or looking forward to engage with? Projects, maybe?
Other topic. So as I mentioned, the different actors involved, the values that different actors face and have in techno-economic change. The state is one key actor. I've worked on the university, the role of universities, of academic entrepreneurship in doing that. And so first I should solidify what I've started working on, because as you pointed out, there is a diverse research portfolio already. But I think a further next question would be to look more closely at individuals and civil societies, social movements, and their role in changing how we think, changing how we consume, and how we transform our way of living.
Yeah.
So that I think that would be a whole different project that I could look at in the future. But
yeah. Success with that. We're looking forward to hearing more. Thanks so much, Lukas.
So Zaha, I understand this is the 4th episode of your podcast.
Yes.
I've listened to you. I'm a big fan of you.
Oh,
I'm a big
thanks
listener.
so much.
What now, after your 4th episode, what is your experience so far? What would you start would you start this podcast again?
Yeah, I like that it's a nice experience using new technologies like this, like recording, and so that's just curious for me personally how that works and how you engage with people. Yeah, a second thing is very interesting in terms of getting to know people and getting really into deep discussions about what they are interested in, and kind of mapping the field in this way. And yeah, it's been quite rewarding, actually. I hope I can make it every month. So far, it has been happening. Yeah, we'll see. I like it so far. I hope. Yeah, maybe the technical side could be improved. The quality of the recording and so on. But so far, so good, I think.
I think it's fantastic, and the idea is really good. And what I think you've managed already in those 4 episodes is to show that thinking about transitions involves talking with very different people. So with people who are more in this sustainability or technological systems thinking, but protesters, and then someone who just talks about abstract things like me. So this, I think you managed to cover the breadth of this very well.
Yeah, that's why it's transitions visions. It's about different perspectives. But I think I do, just the last thing to say, I do have a little bit of a bias towards Eindhoven people, because it's just easier to reach so far. Yeah, so please come to me for if you want to chat with me. Good. No, but thank you so much, Lukas, for your time and for explaining to us about Luhmann and your interpretation, what you're doing with it, and about the role of the state and the different systems that play around with steering. And I hope to have you back sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Zahar. It was great to be here.